Let's start with like the digital currencies that are going up and down every day a lot. You started the hearing with some pretty harsh words for them, saying they've failed to deliver on some of the promises of a more inclusive financial system. They're volatile. They're not good for spending. In your view, do they need to be regulated further? And is there something specific in mind that you have that would sort of bring this area under control better?
So this was our first hearing on digital currencies, and we had a chance to talk with experts, bring in a lot of senators around it. But the bottom line was that what's happening right now in cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin and Dogecoin, it's a wild west out there. And it makes it not a good way to buy and sell things, and not a good investment, and an environmental disaster. So do we need some regulation around this? You bet we do.
In your view, whose purview should this fall under? And when you say, okay, we need more regulation, do you have something in mind, or like a sort of conceptual framework for how regulators should approach this burgeoning space, which, as you say, kind of has a Wild West vibe?
Well, right now, I think what we need to do is the next round of hearings and investigations. Since these cryptocurrencies have gone everywhere, then that means we need to bring in the people who have different responsibilities. So when we're talking about the investor aspect, that people are buying Bitcoin for speculation, if you were buying stock for speculation, you'd be protected by rules against things like pump and dump.
Right.
But not when you're buying Bitcoin for speculation. We need to talk with the SEC about that. On the other hand, when we're talking about the question about bringing it into our monetary system, and banks either holding Bitcoin, that becomes an issue that we need to talk about with the bank regulators. So there are a lot of different pieces to this, and I think the answer that we saw today is that right now our regulators and frankly our Congress is an hour late and a dollar short, and we need to catch up with where these cryptocurrencies are going.
Let's talk about the idea of a digital U.S. dollar, the idea that someone could hold a digital dollar in an online wallet or in a wallet on their phone in some way. Lots of talk about it. Still kind of unclear to me of if something like that were to be implemented, what the goal would be. What do you think about the idea of, say, a central bank digital currency, and what do you think the purpose would be if the U.S. were to at some point launch one?
You know, that's one of the things that came up in this hearing multiple times today.
Yeah.
It's that I understand how a digital currency would work. Instead of the United States government printing dollar bills or minting coins, it would, for example, pay a Social Security check by just putting digital money in your wallet. But the question was, what is the problem it's trying to solve?
Right.
Because, as we all know, most of what happens today is digital, in the sense that my bank does not hold those dollars physically, right? It has a number in a ledger. And when I transfer money to pay on my credit card, they make a transfer that happens electronically. So you really have to kind of think through this. On the other hand, we had some really thoughtful experts who were saying, you may want to integrate this into other systems for payment, for international payment, and there are questions about whether or not the United States maintains competition, say, with China, that's looking deeply into digital currency. Of course, the Chinese want to be able to track all the purchases of all of their citizens, something we're not looking to do in the United States. But I think the answer there is it's on the front edge. And here's what troubles me, is that cryptocurrency, the private version, has swept the earth. Digital currency is not really out of the starting gate yet.
Right.
And so you've got this situation where we kind of need to figure out, are we going to try to give digital currency a little boost here? But we really need to keep an eye on digital currency while we're doing that.
I want to ask you a question, and I think it actually applies both to cryptocurrencies and the idea of a national digital currency. And I'm glad you brought up China and the idea of, okay, a system to monitor everyone's transactions. Because right now, if you and I wanted to transact online, we would do it through, I don't know, PayPal or something like that, and there would be an entity that could look at it. Do you think private transactions should be preserved in some way? This is a thing that people worry about with physical cash disappearing, the idea of transaction privacy. Is this a value that you have, and that in some way we should find a way to continue to allow that to exist in the digital space?
So I understand the idea behind privacy, and I don't want the federal government tracking how I spend my dollars. On the other hand, think about the key feature of a cryptocurrency, and that is secrecy. And it's pretty clear right now that that secrecy really is helpful for drug dealers and for crypto warriors who are hacking into systems around the world and demanding ransom. Because it's a secret way to make payment. Now, the United States has dealt with this traditionally by saying that what happens in checking accounts is secret until someone goes before a judge and gets an order to be able to look at a checking account. That means that checking accounts are not great ways to transfer money between drug dealers. They are not great ways to collect ransom. And this is one of the concerns about cryptocurrency. There's no equivalent to be able to say, okay, you can be private nearly all the time, but not so much that you've created a haven for the criminals.
I just want to remind viewers and listeners, we're speaking with Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Senator Warren, you know, another sort of theme that runs through all this, and it's, of course, a lot of talk in both actually progressive and conservative circles, frankly, is corporate power, and particularly tech corporate power, and the power of the big four, Apple and Facebook. Do you think, you know, one of the things about digital currencies is they are these decentralized networks, and do you think that this should be something that potentially you could be enthusiastic about? The idea of these sort of like digital decentralized networks that aren't necessarily under the control of any one company.
Wow, you took a turn I didn't expect you to take there. I thought you were going to go in the other direction and say, does it make you at all nervous if Amazon or Apple is collecting an incredible amount of private information, not only about your purchases with them, but every place you spend every single penny? That makes me really uneasy. And it makes me particularly uneasy because there's no consumer protection in any part of this. You know, right now, if you use your credit card, you and I both know that if you get scammed, the most you lose is $50, right? That if it gets lost, the most you lose is $50. Not so if you use a cryptocurrency, one of these, as you call it, decentralized, but we could also call it Wild West, no rules, no protection kind of currencies. And when you load the information of all your purchases with other information aggregation that we know Amazon is engaged in, that we know Apple has engaged in, then look at the power that's becoming concentrated in one company. And the ability to be able to exercise influence politically, economically, that really makes me uneasy.
So a lot of people really are uncomfortable with this level of corporate power for all of the reasons you just described. It seems like the main tool that people talk about for going after it is antitrust, but it's not the classical sort of monopoly pricing power issues that you've just laid out. Is there a better tool out there in the toolkit to address what you've identified than the sort of antitrust approach that is sort of commonly taken here?
So there are two ways to think about antitrust first. And one is to say, let's take antitrust back to its roots, where big is a problem. And it poses a threat economically, and it poses a threat politically. So that's one part. Another is to say, maybe it's time to add to our antitrust laws to make sure that they're covering the kind of platform approach that has created so much more concentrated power. But the other is to say, hey, regulators, get up off your duffs and get in on this. We need the SEC. We need the Fed. We need others who say, if you're using this like a currency or you're using it like an investment, then those agencies have a responsibility to step up and make sure that we have some basic consumer protection, that we don't threaten our entire economic system.